So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Hermann Hauser.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's so wonderful to see so many of you here, I understand, from 45 different countries. This is wonderful, and you're the age group that is going to make this happen, this new technology. And it's the talk that I'm giving today is a technology progress in uncertain times. So I'll talk a little bit about technology sovereignty, which has become a key issue. Mainly because of the nice person that we have in the White House, who's just visiting the UK. I'll talk a little bit about AI. Of course, you can't open a newspaper without getting a headline on AI, and it really is the most important, in my opinion, and many other people's opinion, the most important technology that we have ever developed. It's also the most transformative one. And to quote my friend Demis Hassabis, who is head of Google DeepMind and also a Cambridge graduate. He just got a Nobel Prize in chemistry for his AlphaFold program. And he recently said he believes that AI will be 10 times more transformative than the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution had some effect on the way we live and the way we work. So he says it's 10 times more transformative, and he believes it's going to happen 10 times faster. And I think both of these are very important facts. Because I'm a physicist, of course, I want to tell you about the latest progress in quantum computing. But long term, I do believe that the most important of those three very fundamental changes that we see in technology is synthetic biology, because it concerns our own being, our own biological selves, and we've finally figured out how to build biology, not just to study it. I'm also a member of the European Innovation Council, and I'll tell you about this very exciting work that we're doing on scale-ups, because this is the #1 problem now in Europe. But although there is a lot of gloom and doom around, there is also some good news. For the first time in history, European venture capital actually gives better returns than American venture capital. So there's more money flowing into Europe in venture capital, albeit from a low base. We only have a quarter of the venture capital in Europe compared with the venture capital in the US. When you have a down cycle, which we're just coming out of it, it's actually the best time to start a company. So if you're thinking about startups, if you're thinking about technology, now is a good time to start. Interestingly, it's also the perfect time to have a new venture fund. There are lots and lots of studies that people have done about their venture returns. And the one thing that correlates surprisingly well with venture returns is when a venture fund has been launched. And if it's launched in the down cycle, in a way, not surprisingly, the returns are better than in an upcycle, because you can buy cheap and hopefully sell high, whereas in an upcycle, of course, you buy high and you have to sell low. As I mentioned, I am a board member of the European Innovation Council Fund, which is our 10 billion deep tech fund in Europe. It's the largest deep tech fund in the world. And we've just announced that we're going to raise another 20 billion for scale-ups. So this will be a market fund that gets cornerstoned by the EIC, and we hope to have the first closing early next year. We now have a big culture change which happened in Europe. I'm old enough to be able to tell you that this excitement that young people like you have about technology is new, and especially the willingness of professors to support spin-outs and universities to be very supportive of spin-outs has only happened, in the last 10 to 20 years. And since I started this work some 40 years ago, this was very hard to start off with. You would go to professors and suggest, that this technology really is very exciting and we should have a startup, we should spin this out, we should put a bit of money behind it to make it grow. And the response I got from many of the professors here in Cambridge and elsewhere in Europe is, who do you think I am doing this pact with Mammon? I'm a good guy. I'm not going to get involved in commercialization, and dirty my pure academic hands by doing anything commercial or economic. Fortunately, this culture change has happened in Cambridge about 20 or 30 years ago. In Central Europe, it took a little longer, but also even in Germany, which was a laggard, this has now happened. Everybody believes that technology is important. Everybody believes that startups are really a very important part of any growth economy, because we're not going to get the growth from the old economies, who are often shedding people, but from these new technologies. However, there is a big problem with technology sovereignty now, because we've become so dependent on technology. So if you take a smartphone away, especially from your generation, but even older people will not feel that life is worth living without smartphones, which actually, on average, you will look at about 200 to 300 times a day. You always reach in there and what's happened? Is Trump fallen off Windsor Castle yet? No, I would have shame. Yeah. And you also want to get up to date with what's happening in the world. So it's a central issue for Europe, but also for other countries. And the question is, how do you define sovereignty? And one of the misconceptions about sovereignty is that sovereignty means you're doing everything yourself. So I'm writing a book on technology sovereignty and technology colonialism. And one of the first chapters I was working on is the chapter on semiconductors, because semiconductors really is the base technology that pretty much everything else that I'll be talking about is based on. So if you look at my book started thinking about three technology sovereignty circles, and the assumption was that the US, Europe, and China will be three separate technology circles that can do everything themselves. But really the key, I very quickly came to the conclusion, as I will tell you in a moment, that this is not possible. So then the question is, how can a nation ensure that it has access to all the critical technologies that are necessary to govern a country and have an independent economy? And typical examples, of course, are the semiconductor industry, the networking industry, equally important, because a smartphone without connectivity is useless. AI and machine learning, synthetic biology, and also a blockchain and smart contracts. So COVID taught us two economic problems that we have in Europe, and indeed in the world. And it was a wake-up call for most nations on how dependent we are on manufacturing in China, and how dependent we are on technology suppliers, especially in the US. And the reason why I'm writing this book actually was an action during Trump 1, where Trump weaponized its duopoly on chip design software with Synopsys, Cadence and Synopsys, to force us to do something that we didn't want to do. So this ability with monopolies or oligopolies that are concentrated in a single country is that a government in this country can use this as a weapon. And the dependence on these technologies can be so extreme, like in the case of chip design software, because ARM needs chip design software. We can't design chips without the chip design software from these two American companies, that it's equally severe as military occupation in the past, because this economic coercion basically means that another country can force a country or a company to do whatever they want. So this economic coercion is as effective as military coercion in yesterdays. That's why we need a 100 billion fund, and 20 billion is a good a step in the right direction. So in order to define this technology sovereignty, I've come up with 3 questions. The first question is, do we have all the critical technologies that we need in our country ourselves? In which case, of course, everything is fine. But as we'll see in a moment, nobody has that. It's actually not possible because of the way our economy is organized. So then the second question is, if we don't have 1 or 2 of these critical technologies, do we have access to this technology from multiple independent countries so that no single country can use the control of the technology to exert economic coercion on you? And if the answer to the second one is also no, we've got to ask the third question, which is, do we have unfettered, long-term, more than 5 years, guaranteed access from a single country, say the US or China? And if you get 3 no's, then it's one of those situations where you have to do whatever it takes. Because if you don't, you're then willing to expose yourself to this economic coercion from a single country and a single supplier. And if you're unhappy about that, then you got to do something about the one, to get at least 1 yes on the 3. So as I said, I started off this book by saying there are 3 technology sovereignty circles. And the conclusion of the book was, out of the 3, if you're not one of the 3, which one do you choose as an independent or a new country? And my argument was going to be, choose Europe, because it's the only one of the 3 that's not a hegemon. Because if you join the US will ask, are you with us or are you against us? And if you then, no, I'm with you, then they say, that's wonderful, now do exactly as I say. The same thing is true with China. As you know, there's this Belt and Road Initiative where China tries to become a country that has a very strong relationship with the Belt and Road Initiative countries and make them not quite completely dependent, but make them part of their sphere of influence. Europe is the only one of the 3 that has a history of accommodating national differences. And therefore, I would argue, if you're a nation that isn't part of the 3 circles yet, choose Europe, because you have at least a historic example of being able to retain your independence, your independent culture, and your independent attitudes to things. I'm a passionate and very proud European, and one of the reasons why I'm so proud of Europe is because it is the only area in the world that has managed to create a governance layer above the nation state, which sort of works. Now, we bitch about Brussels all the time, that they make rules that we don't like, etc. And whenever Brussels does something good, the local politicians will say, the only reason why Brussels has passed this law is I pushed them into, that was the only reason. If they do anything bad, then it's Brussels' fault. It's not my fault, we voted against it, but Brussels forced us on it. So Brussels is on a no-win situation. Having said that, Brussels created the second most important currency in the world with the euro. Because of the European Union, we have peace in Europe since the Second World War, which is a longer period of peace than we've had in hundreds of years, because in Europe, we traditionally used to knock each other's heads in, at least twice a century. So I hope this is not going to happen again. And a lot of that has to do with the European Union, and the basis of the European is respect for differences of the different nations. So, 2 more points about Europe, in particular in contrast with the US. Some of you might have heard that Trump is keen to make Canada the 52nd state of the US. And having done that, they will then expand to take Greenland over. And they're also thinking about Mexico. So Ursula von der Leyen, I thought, had a wonderful response to that and said, I don't think she said it to Trump, but she did say it to American newspapers as well, that one of the differences between the US and Europe is that there are actually 150 million people who have applied to join the European Union voluntarily. So we don't have to go out and conquer them. They actually are keen to be part of this union. This, of course, is the Ukraine, it's Turkey, and it's a number of other states that are keen to join it. So how do you join the European Union, and are we open for business? And how do you join this technology sovereignty circles? And I have an interesting story to tell you about this, and that is New Zealand. My wife is in New Zealand, and we spent the winters down there, and because the New Zealand government realized that I spent quite a bit of time in New Zealand, I sort of became an advisor to various government issues, and they asked me, well, could New Zealand join Horizon Europe, which is our 100 billion research initiative? And I said, well, I don't know, but I'll ring up my friends in Brussels. And I got the following response. They said, well, New Zealand doesn't score very high on geographic proximity. But this is not the question we ask. The question we ask is, do you share European values? And there, of course, neither New Zealand, nor Australia, nor Canada has any issue with European values. So I asked them, well, what are the European values? And interestingly said, didn't you know? We have it on the website. So there is a website where you can read what the European values are. Now, all those 3 countries, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, have now applied to become part of Horizon Europe. And I'm delighted to tell you that New Zealand is now part of Horizon Europe. So we've got a success story here. To take this a step further, I gave a talk to some Japanese people in Dublin yesterday, and I told them the story. And interestingly, they said, well, Japan is now applying to become Horizon Europe. And interestingly, of course, they don't have any problems with European values either, because the values of the Japanese society are not very different from European values at all. Respect for the judiciary and all the sort of fundamental things of human rights that you would expect. So the question for Europe, of course, is that the US is Google and Meta and Amazon, etc. China is this behemoth of manufacturing capability. And we have to decide on whether we are going to be this type of Europe. We're very proud of our past, or whether we are this type of Europe. This is the MAP laboratory in the Cambridge Science Park. And I hope that, apart from being proud of our Colosseum in Rome, we should spend most of our time thinking about our future and our technology. So, what's the role of the European Innovation Council? So I helped write the rules for the European Innovation Council many years ago. And in order to structure a fund that is a public fund that spends your taxpayers' money, I wanted to make sure that it is a fair fund, but also a fund that can be very successful and can have the impact that we want it to be. So I went to see another Austrian called Helga Novotny. Now, Helga was the first president of the European Research Council. And the European Research Council arguably has been one of the great success stories of the European Union, because every university in Europe, even very humble universities like Cambridge University, will quote the number of ERC grants they have as a sign for the quality of research that they are doing. It's great success. I said, Helga, why is it that the ERC has become such a fantastic success? And she said, very simple, 2 principles. Principle number 1, any PI, any principal investigator at any European university can make an application. Now, this was a big break with university hierarchies, especially in Germany or my native Austria, because these universities often had professors having total fiefdoms and decide everything that happens in their department. And here, for the first time, any private investigator, principal investigator, sorry, that was a slip of the tongue, wasn't it? Any principal investigator could make an application, and therefore, the money that he got was personal to him. So if the professor didn't like it, he could take his money, move to some other university, and do his research there. So it completely revolutionized or democratized the way that research is being done in Europe. The second principle was that the only selection criterion was excellence. It didn't matter where it came from, which university it came from, which country it came from, which type of person made the application. As long as it's an excellent application, it would win the ERC grant. So we copied that for the EIC, the European Innovation Council. We said our principle number 1 is that any company in Europe can make an application. Again, irrespective of which country it came from, whether it's Cambridge or Timbuktu. No, that's not in Europe. Any country in Europe. And the only selection criterion is excellence. So the result at the ERC has been a number of Nobel laureates. The result with the EIC so far has been, I think, 8 unicorns. So we hope to invigorate the European deep tech scene. I also say that the EIC, in a way, is a venture capital firm from heaven, because it's the only venture capital company in the world that I know that can also give grants. So many of our investments are blended investments, as they're called. They're a mixture between grant and equity. So we can give up to 2.5 million euros worth of grants, which isn't, it's not a small amount, and up to 50 million of equity investment in any round. I insisted, against a lot of pressure from politicians, that the EIC is not allowed to invest in high-tech companies unless at least 50% of the money comes from the market. I did this for 2 reasons. One is so that the EIC with 10 billion is by far the largest deep tech fund actually in the world, that this fund doesn't get accused of crowding out the market. But because of this rule, it crowds in the market because it has to have money from the market, otherwise it can't invest. The second rule, of course, was that this is a new fund and didn't have the experience, the network, the due diligence capability that was necessary, but that was available from the venture capital community in the market. And this rule has served us incredibly well, because now the ratio is not 1-to-1, but 1 to 4.5. So every euro that we invest as the EIC attracts 4.5 euros from the market. So it's not 10 billion, it's more like 40 billion now. And now we're starting this scale-up initiative, this 20 billion scale-up initiative, to address the single largest problem we still have in Europe. Our university system in Europe has an output that is comparable to the IP output in the United States. There's nothing wrong with our university system. We've got a fine set of European universities, and indeed, you're in one of them here. Europe, and this is not widely known, but widely documented now, actually produces more startups than the US, which in a way is not surprising because we're 450 million people and they're only 300 and something. Where the big problem lies is that once our startup companies grow to a size where they have a chance of becoming a global company, we do not provide the hundreds of millions and occasionally billions that are necessary to make them global winners. The US and China do this very well. We don't. So we have a scale-up problem. We don't have a startup problem, we have a scale-up problem. And this is, at least on the money side, the solution to that problem. We still have a management problem as well. One of the issues is, or one of the great advantages that Silicon Valley still has, is if I want to grow a company from, say, revenues of 50 million to 500 million or 1 billion, then I go to the guy at Apple or Meta or Amazon or Microsoft who runs a $1 billion division of their big tech company. And I show them the scale-up and say, would you like to be CEO of that scale-up? And here is a very attractive option package. And if he likes it, then 2 weeks later, he is the CEO of that scale-up. We've got two problems with that in Europe. First of all, we have very few large tech companies in Europe. There are only 3 European tech companies that are worth more than 100 billion, and that's ASML, SAP, and our own Cambridge company, ARM, which produces the microprocessor in your phone. That's one problem. The other is that the culture of highly competent managers that run $1 billion divisions of big companies isn't there of joining small scale-up companies. And even if they want to, they typically have notice periods of 6 months or a year, whereas in the Valley, they're all on a 2-week notice period. So we have our problems, but let me give you a good example of a company we funded some time ago called Solexa. Solexa is a spin-out from the chemistry department here in Cambridge. And 2 professors, Shankar Balasubramanian and David Kleinerman, had this brilliant idea of a sequencing by synthesis. As you know, the DNA is a double helix. So if you just take one strand of the double strand and have the complementary nucleotides and add them one at a time, where the nucleotide has a fluorophore associated with it, if you just look at it with a microscope, you can look at the different colors as they get put together. And therefore, you can find out what the sequences of these base pairs as you grow them. And this is, was a fantastic breakthrough, and indeed is now responsible for 80% of the gene sequencing in the world. So it's become a dominant company. It's a decacorn. how did we build that decacorn if we didn't have the management talent? Well, in this particular case, we managed to get one from the US. It is a person called John West, who used to run the $1 billion division of ABI that had a 90% market share in gene sequencing at the time. And we said, John, we've got bad news and good news for you. And the bad news is we have a machine here in Cambridge in this small startup that is 100 times better than the machine that you're selling. We're going to blow you out of the water. The good news is we want you to do it. So he being an MIT-trained physicist, he traveled to Cambridge, looked at the technology, realized that it was 100 times better than the one that he's selling, and became CEO of that company. So, we might not have homegrown talent, but sometimes we can attract the best people in the world to grow our companies. And that's one of the key stories of modern technology, this is very much a global game. This is the working title of my book at the moment, Technology Survey for the Team of 8 Billion. I actually took that idea of the team of 8 billion from Jacinda Ardern, who was Prime Minister in New Zealand. And New Zealand had 250 deaths throughout the COVID period. It was the most successful policy to keep New Zealand safe from COVID, because Jacinda locked down the country before we had our first death in New Zealand. It was a very efficient way of protecting New Zealand from COVID. And she put it down to the team of 5 million. Now, New Zealand only has 5 million inhabitants, and the team of what she meant by that is when the government said, use QR codes every time you go to a restaurant or to a petrol station on your app, the New Zealanders put in the QR code whenever they went to a petrol station. So when there was somebody that was tested positive for COVID, they could track all the people that were at the petrol station at the same time. They all were tested, and that's the way they controlled the outbreak. There's also an interesting meme that went around New Zealand at the time. Some people said, well, the reason why New Zealand is so successful in fighting COVID was the fact that New Zealand is a high-tech nation that produced the apps that work very quickly, and it is an island. If only Britain was a high-tech nation and I'm out, they could have done the same. So I want to make some sort of fundamental comments on computer architectures, because that's what I'm known for with the ARM, which has become our most successful company, worth 150 billion now. It's a balance between computing and communication. And there's a very interesting paper that has just come out of the importance of the network, the communication in AI, for example. So Huawei has just produced a phenomenally successful unified bus that is actually better than the NLink from NVIDIA. So although the Ascent microprocessor or GPU that they have, the AI processor from Huawei, is a lot less powerful than NVIDIA, the combination of the less powerful processor with a more powerful network produces a system that is actually more powerful than the NVIDIA system. So it's a very interesting validation of my theme that architectures is computing and communication. If you look at computer architectures, it's really semiconductors that are nature's gift to computing. Because we started with mechanical computers that were slow and unreliable. Then we moved to valves, which were fast but unreliable. It was only when semiconductors arrived that we had a technology that was fast, reliable, and scalable. And that's the basis for all our computers now. There is a new type of computer architecture called in-memory compute, which is 100 times lower power than the von Neumann architectures that are used everywhere. And I can tell you about that later in the questions. Quantum computing. We have three eras of quantum computing. One was physical qubits, which is just past. Now we're in the era of logical qubits. We had the first 50 logical qubits last year. Logical qubits are error-corrected qubits, and that's very, very difficult to do in quantum computing because these qubits only live for a few microseconds. So you really have to, they're very fickle. You've got to look after them in order to do any calculation. But the last and most important step is really distributed scalable quantum computers that will solve many problems that cannot be solved with classical computers. And the fundamental reason why these quantum computers are so much more powerful than classical computings are two quantum phenomena called superposition and entanglement. Superposition means that a qubit, a quantum bit, can represent 0 and 1 at the same time. So it's 10% 0, 90% 1, 70% 0, 30% 1. And it is that ratio between zeros and 1 that characterizes a qubit. Now, this is pretty weird, but not as weird as entanglement. Entanglement is really a rather acquired taste. And nobody really understands how this works. And Richard Feynman famously said, famous Nobel laureate in physics famously said, nobody understands quantum mechanics. You just get used to it after a while. So we know what entanglement does, and it is actually the secret for the exponential performance increase of quantum computers over classical computers. There are 5 different qubit types at the moment: superconducting ion traps, cold atoms, photonic and electron spin ones. And we've got a very interesting European company in Innsbruck, which is the sort of birthplace of quantum computing. It just got its Nobel Prize for it. Zeilinger is the first person that got a Nobel Prize for quantum computing. And there is a company called Parity QC, which is actually run by my niece in Innsbruck, that is the only architecture company in quantum computing. And the big prize is to get to 100 logical qubits. If you get 100 logical qubits, you can do things that no classical computer can do. So what is it all good for? Well, I think the most important problem that can be solved by quantum computers, but not by classical computers, is molecular modeling. It's calculating the electron clouds that surround molecules. And of course, it's the electron clouds that surround the atoms in the nuclei in a molecule that determines its chemical properties. In particular, a small molecule that might bind in a binding site in a protein, which is the reason why drugs work, can be modeled with quantum computers. And therefore, long-term, we might have drug trials in silicon. There's also some very important financial modeling that it can do. And there is this interesting thing about cybersecurity. The most famous algorithm in quantum computers is an algorithm that was designed by Peter Shor called Shor's algorithm. And Shor's algorithm has been shown to be able to crack RSA 2048, which is the encryption standard that we use for all our encryption across the world. So all the bank transfers, WhatsApp encryption, this is all based on RSA 2048. And this algorithm on a quantum computer can crack it. So we now have a great effort in the technology space to find post-quantum cryptology, to find quantum secure solutions to that. And there are 2. One is called PQC for post-quantum cryptology, and the other QKD. The interesting thing is that all the governments are implementing 3 new PQC algorithms, but they're only as good as the number of hackers that fail to crack it. Whereas QKD, quantum key distribution, is provably uncrackable because if Alice tries to send a quantum encrypted photon, for example, to Bob, it's always Alice sending to Bob, and Eve trying to listen in. If that happens, because one of the fundamental principles of quantum mechanics is that you cannot observe something without disturbing it. So Bob will always know whether Eve has been trying to listen in or not, and therefore you can make it totally secure. I've told you about the three phases of quantum computer. Let me make a few comments on AI because we're running short of time. And that is, I believe the next big step in AI will actually happen with robots, because robots have two interesting properties that are different from present AI. I got this very interesting business plan recently from Lund, the very famous university professor who's been researching machine learning for 30 years. And he says, Hermann, data is not important. I thought, this is an unusual approach. Since people are, normally very keen on the data. So what do you do if you don't value data so highly? He says, reality. Reality is the largest data set there is. It's always up to date. It's real time. No hallucinations ever. It fights back if you think it's different from them. And but how do you get at it? And the answer is, of course, through sensors. You sense reality through cameras, through audio, and all the other, through LiDAR, all the sensors that we have. And you can build up the most accurate representation of the world through this sensor interaction. So, since the number one problem that we have in AI is that we've run out of data because we've already ingested all the data that is available in digital form, this is a source of very high quality data that is basically inexhaustible. It also is a very healthy ground for new algorithms because reality fights back if you get something wrong. I was going to let me play this because it's such an important part of the...
Hey, figure one, what do you see right now?
I see a red apple on a plate in the center of the table, a drying rack with cups and a plate, and you standing nearby with your hand on the table.
Great, can I have something to eat?
Should they?
Great. Can you explain why you did what you just did while you pick up this trash?
On it. So I gave you the apple because it's the only edible item I could provide you with from the table.
Great. So, based on the scene right now, where do you think the dishes in front of you go next?
The dishes on the table, like that plate and cup, are likely to go into the drying rack next.
Great. Can you put them there?
Look how Bill picks up the plate. It uses the trick that we have with two hands.
All right. So, how do you think you did?
I think I did pretty well. The apple found its new owner, the trash is gone, and the tableware is right where it belongs.
I agree. Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome. If there's anything else you need help with, just let me know.
So as you can see, we've made a lot of progress in robotics because the whole interaction with that robot was in English. Right. So there, having said that, GPT-5 was not a great success. It was a bit of a damp squib. However, progress in AI has been spectacular, but we're sort of reaching a peak without having robots helping us with this. And large language models are, of course, very important. But we have this new approach called the neuromorphic approach. In fact, there's a Cambridge company called Unlikely AI that is not statistically based, but is logically based. And that is, so I want to end up with synthetic biology because I think long-term this is the most important new technology. Again, quoting Richard Feynman, I do not understand what I cannot build. And we can now build biology. We can synthesize DNA. And this will have a fantastic effect on our health system. And there is a Cambridge human cell company called BitBio and another Cambridge company called Clock.bio that is doing research into rejuvenation and aging that I'm very excited about as an investor in both. So in conclusion, we've got this fantastic progress in technologies in 25. We've got these critical technologies like AI, quantum computing, and synthetic biology, but technology sovereignty is a sort of key issue. So I thank you very much for your attention. Please, questions, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, sure. So thank you for the very nice talk. And it's very nice for me because also I come from the semiconductor industry. So I'm not that much in biotech, but so my work is in organic semiconductors, which is a new kind of architecture that we're trying to develop. And the nice thing about them is kind of easier to integrate in biological applications in the future. So thankfully I'm part also one of these EIC grants, which I'm very appreciated. Uh, but I'm based in Switzerland, so we are kind of an external partner. So we don't have like too much. So we're relying more in the European, in the EU countries. So my question is, if at some point you guys are you targeting to also include more countries into these grants? For instance, like I come from Mexico, so at some point I would like to have more partners there because production of these materials or devices can be even easier and faster in other countries than because in Europe it's nicer to do research. There is better to do all these innovations, but for production it's probably easier to do it in other countries, in Africa, in South America, and such. So the question is, is there an interest to also try to get partners from other locations?
Yes, it's a key issue, also a sovereignty issue, of course. And in the semiconductor in particular, as I talked about these three technology sovereignty circles, the US, China, and Europe, the interesting fact is that neither the US nor China nor Europe have a clue on how to produce chips. There are only two companies that know how to produce chips below 5 nanometers, and that's TSMC in Taiwan and Samsung in Korea. And they're in Taiwan and Korea, they're not in the US, they're not in China, they're not in Europe. So what we need, and what, of course, the US has done, is attracted TSMC to come to Phoenix, and they've built a big factory there that has now produced the first 4 nanometer chip in the United States. We've done the same in Dresden with TSMC, but typical for Europe, we're doing sort of things half-heartedly. So that factory is only 12 nanometers at the moment, with a long-term view of getting down below 5 nanometers. But we need our own manufacturing capability, absolutely right. There was another question here. Yep.
Thank you for your talk. At the beginning, they were saying a little bit about your background and that you have invested in many companies. So my question will be, what are the key factors that you look into for deciding? I guess one of them will be based in Europe and that it has the values that you look for.
Yes, that's for the EIC, but I also run a venture fund called Amadeus Capital Partners, where we can invest anywhere in the world, and there are 3 factors that I look for. And it took a little while for me to come up with these three factors in the following sequence. So number one is not technology as I originally thought, but the market. It's the size and the growth rate of the market. Number two is the quality of the team. And I'm normally looking for at least one star, often a technical star, but can also be a CEO star, because it's so much easier to build a world-class team around a star. And technology only is number three. Technology is important to us because we're a technology investor. In particular, the defensibility of the technology is an important investment criteria for us. But the reason why it's in this order is that I've seen so many examples where an A team with C technology wins over the C team with A technology. So that's why it's that, I think there was another one over there.
Thank you, Herman. Super interesting talk. I'm Sergi. My background has nothing to do with this, but I have several questions. One of them was, what about Taiwan and TSMC? I think this is more or less answered now. The other one on cybersecurity. Does quantum computing represent a challenge to blockchain technology? Is this vulnerable to quantum computing?
Yes, it is, because in the same way that Shor's algorithm can crack RSA 2048, it can also crack the blockchain.
Okay, and the second one, I think you had a negative opinion about Brexit, and now you've been talking about the UK as part of Europe. Do you think Brexit in the long term is reversible?
Well, I hope so. I hope so, and at least, in Horizon Europe, we've managed to. So Brexit was a terrible experience for me because I'm a passionate European. I've lived here in the UK half of my life, so I've become rather an Anglophile, right? So it was a bit like my parents divorced. I'm always trying to get them back together again. So, and we have succeeded with Horizon Europe. Britain is now back into Horizon Europe, and there are a number of other of the crazy effects of Brexit that we're trying to fix. I don't think there will be another referendum anytime soon because it's too close and too touchy, and reform is too big an opinion poll rating in the UK. But long term, I think sense will prevail and Britain will be part of the EU. But don't ask me when. Yes, let's do those three first.
Thank you for this very important topic. Considering the attitude of China regarding European patent and the dumping policy, and as for the US, the fact that they're raising as many barriers to entry in their own internal market, as well as implementing some very aggressive regulation to capture the data of every company who step a foot in the US, basically. What do you suggest we should do besides, granting money to our innovators to protect them in the long run?
Apart from granting what?
Granting money to the innovator, to protect them in the long run till they scale up.
Yes. Well, we need to be independent of both China and the US, of course, but we also need to have. We can't ignore China. It's going to be the number one nation in the world this century, sometime probably in 5 to 10 years. It's a large market that we need to serve with our startup companies, and some of our aggressive sanction policies sadly have the exact opposite effect of the one that we intended. And the one that I know well, of course, is the semiconductor industry, where both Europe and the US has very severe sanctions on the semiconductor manufacturing, in particular in the US. And Europe has a monopoly on the most advanced lithography machine called ASML in order to produce these very small feature sizes on chips below 5 nanometers. There is only one company in the world that can do that, can produce the lithography machines, and that's a Belgian company called ASML. The reason why our sanction policy, I think, is misguided is because you need three things to succeed in the semiconductor industry. You need money. the US has a 50 billion CHIPS Act, Europe has a 40 billion CHIPS Act, China has a $150 billion CHIPS Act. So they're outspending Europe and the US taken together. The second thing that you need is talented engineers. Same story. The US produces more talented engineers than the US and Europe taken together, and they work harder. But the third thing people often forget is the market. Now, more than 50% of the world's chip market is in China because they produce all the laptops, the smartphones, etc. So if you get 3 out of 3, who's going to win this race? They're going to win it. Now, once they have won it, they're not going to be nice to us when we produce the sanctions on them. So actually, this sanction policy is counterproductive and stupid. So the right policy, of course, is to negotiate with China on in the same way that we negotiated with the Japanese car industry. There was a period quite a few years ago when it looked as if the Japanese car industry was going to take over the world. And what we did is we made sure, because they produced lower cost, higher quality cars than either the US or Europe. So we invited them to build their factories in the US and in Europe. And actually that had a very positive effect also on the European car industry because it created the competition to teach us on how to produce high quality cars cheaply because the competition was there, but it retained European employment, European know-how, and that's the relationship that we need to seek with China rather than being aggressive and losing it long term. There were two more things. 1 minute, right?
Thank you so much. Very interesting. I was hoping that maybe you might have some extra insights that could be useful to us here. I'm from Latvia, and obviously in the Baltics, we're feeling a push towards new innovations when it comes to defense tech, very much so. And I was wondering if you have any, I don't know, guidance or just input on how we can see this split in terms of what direction the EU is going to try to look for funding. You mentioned, security as one of your main things that even during the opening. So like obviously it's gonna be important, and like in our region, we feel it a lot. Yeah.
Yes, I understand that, and the Scale-Up Fund as well as the EIC Fund are all dual use. As a venture capitalist, we never invested in tobacco and arms. The VC community didn't do that until the Ukraine. And then the question is, well, do you want to defend yourself or do you want to give up and become Russian? And that's a stark choice. So we all decided, surprisingly, very quickly, that we've got to invest in the latest technology, especially since defense technology, especially with drones, is developing so super fast. So much so, I'm very friendly with the founder of Helsing, one of the drone companies in Germany, using a lot of AI. He believes that in about 2 years' time, neither tanks nor artillery pieces will have any value whatsoever, because drones can now be produced for the same price as a single artillery shell. But if you have a drone instead of a shell, of course, it can be much more intelligent in finding its target. So this is a key issue. Maybe we'll take a last on this side so that you don't feel we've completely neglected your... Yes.
Thank you for the talk. We're just going to be back to the quantum computing part. And because I've seen that Google, not a while ago, they claimed they're producing a breakthrough technology in quantum chips and that they can run complex operations on random circuit sampling. That would take like 10 zillion years to do. So it's a huge claim, but I just was wondering, how's that applicable in life and with our research to do that and even leverage it in AI?
Yes, there are a number of companies that now reaching or getting close to what is known in the industry as quantum advantage, of being able to solve a problem with a quantum computer that you can't really solve with a classical computer. Traditionally, these were really hard mathematical problems that didn't have any great relevance. And that was called quantum supremacy, and actually Google showed that some years ago. Quantum advantage is something that's really useful, really practical. And there, I think the molecular simulation, especially to produce new catalysts and new electrodes for better batteries, would be a key breakthrough where quantum computers can help us a lot. Well, thank you very much for your interest and question.